just to give you a roadmap for where I'm going to go over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to introduce myself, talk about what I do as an economics professor, go through some trends in US healthcare, although I saw some comments in the chat already thinking about healthcare more internationally and broadly as well, talk about an economic concept called the production function, and then talk about trade-offs, and then show you the way that the syllabus for my course works. What's the arc and the shape of the course of economics in the healthcare program. So let's dive right in. So here I have a picture of Adam Grant. This might be a man you're familiar with. He is a professor. He has done some work for Facebook. And to the right, I have a picture of the United States Pentagon. This is where the US Department of Defense is. Now, why might I have these two things at the start of my slide about healthcare? Well, I'll tell you. So Adam Grant was once called in to teach a class about management to generals in the United States Army. And after his first semester teaching the generals, he looked at his course evaluation feedback and he said, and the generals said to him, I think he learned a lot from us in the class. And he said, oh, darn, my goal was to teach them. And then the next semester he came back in, he said on his first day, look, I've never flown an airplane. I've never been on a battlefield. I've never driven a tank. I know about the economics of management. And so that's what I'm going to teach you rather than teach you things you already know. And I bring this example up because I am not a physician. I've never been an employee of a hospital, right? I've never sewn up a wound in surgery. I've never bought an MRI machine. I'm an economist, which means that I teach the language of economics to a cohort, a group of professionals who knows much more about many things. And my job is to bring you what I know. And I want to ground myself in that. And just to share a little bit about my background. So moving from left to right, I worked at the Federal Trade Commission, which is the United States organization for protecting consumers and preserving competition in American society. Then I went and got my PhD at the Wharton School in Managerial Economics, and I've been at Bentley. That slide says 2024. It's now been 3 years since I've been at Bentley. In the background is a fireside chat I had with CDC Director Rochelle Walensky last September. So let's dive into the real meat and potatoes of what this course is about. So I have a question for us to just take 3 seconds to think about. And I'll sit silently so we can think about this as well. Would you rather be in the richest 10% of society 130 years ago or the poorest 10% of society today? And I'm sure that we're thinking about things like, oh, how great it was to have a butler bring us food in 1890. But also, I really like my indoor plumbing and don't like to go out into the outhouse. And when I in the middle of the winter, that's no fun. And the poorest 10% of society today, although they have access to the internet, also have a lot of drawbacks. And so there is no right answer to this question. But there are a lot of things that are different. And in particular, what healthcare looked like 100 years ago, 50 years ago, even 20 years ago is radically different than it looks like today. There's been a ton of innovation, ton of change, whether that's pharmaceuticals, procedures, technology, and all of that change is interwoven throughout the entire course that I teach. Innovation, technological change is part of the economics. So I'm going to just read a quote for a second. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger is not fed, who are cold and not clothed. In this way of life, in all sense, is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. I oftentimes ask this question, does anyone know who said this? And the answer is not someone in healthcare, but Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s after World War II. And there was a big question at the time, which is Europe had been decimated by a military activity. How should Europe be rebuilt? Should it be rebuilt in how the economics described it at the time, guns or butter? Right? Butter is all the things that we love. Literally, it's the fat on our bread and in our cakes, but it's also the educational institutions, the cultural institutions, the hospitals. And guns is metaphorically all of the potentially wasteful things. And the point that the president was trying to make is that when we have a budget, we face deep trade-offs. And I bring this quote because I want to motivate my own 2 definitions of what economics is. One definition is economics is the study of infinite want and scarce resources. And if we had infinite wants and infinite resources, it wouldn't be an economic question. We would just eat until we were full, innovate all the things what we needed. It's by very definition, the scarcity of our resources and the infinity of our wants that drive economic decisions. So suppose a new hospital has a $25 million budget for a new building. They could put it in nephrology for kidney care or for cancer care, but maybe not both. And how does a firm make a decision like that where the strategy is really difficult? And then another definition of economics is the study of equity and efficiency, where equity is fairness and efficiency is how productive we are as an institution, as a firm, as a system. And balancing the trade-off between efficiency and equity is a core concept of economics. So here I have an old lithograph of Adam Smith, who is the father of the profession of economics. He wrote The Wealth of Nations about 250 years ago, and he introduced this concept that puzzled economists for a long time that I want to talk about. And it's called the diamond water paradox. And the diamond water paradox goes as follows. Water is deeply important to human life. Without water, we would be dead in a week. But diamonds, although they are pretty, are not deeply important. So why are diamonds so expensive and water? I can go to the water fountain and get it for free, or at the very least, pay $1 for a bottle, right? What the heck is going on here? And this really puzzled economists for a long time until they realized that the price of something is driven by how scarce it is, right? Water is plentiful, it's abundant. We can go to the stream and fill our water up. Whereas diamonds, they're scarce. So what drives the high cost, the high price of certain objects on the market, like a really advanced cardiac center? It comes from the fact that it is scarce relative to the substitute options. So this is another idea that underpins a lot of what we do in the economics curriculum. So I want to spend a little bit talking about the US healthcare system. And we don't only focus on the US, but for today's mini class, I think it might be worthwhile. So I have two graphs here, and if we were on a regular class, everyone would be in deep conversation now. So I'm hoping you envision the idea of me calling on someone and us beginning to kind of go through this. But on the bottom of these graphs, running across the horizontal axis, we have the years between 1960 and today. And running up the vertical, in the left graph, the one that says health expenditure as percent of GDP, gross domestic product, we have 0 to 20%. Which means that in 1960, about 5% of gross domestic product, all the money that we spend on anything in the United States, was spent on healthcare. And by 2017, the end of this figure, and it's continued up, nearly 20%, 18% of our gross domestic product was spent on healthcare. In other words, 1 in every $5 in this country that is spent on healthcare. So if you were in the room now, I would ask you, what's different about these two graphs? On the right is the per capita graph. Per capita is how much money is spent per person on healthcare. So in 2016, about $10,000 per person, this is the topmost right of the right figure, were spent on healthcare dollars. That's like the price of a new car for a family of 4 is spent on healthcare every single year, right? So first of all, these graphs are upward sloping. Over time, both the percent of GDP and the per person spending on healthcare is rising. That's notable, and we would expect it to go up if quality was getting better, but maybe not by this much. And the second thing I really want to draw attention to is on the left-hand graph, it kind of looks like a staircase, right? It's going up, but it kind of inches up and has leveling off and then steep again and levels off. So what does it mean for the graph to be leveled off for, say, 3 or 4 years? What that means is we have somehow got spending growth in healthcare in the United States under control. Meaning year over year, when that graph is flat, we're not seeing increases in the share of spending on health. We have our budget under control, and the question I have as an economist is why, right? We have a budget, and we're able to constrain costs. What are we doing? So one of these flat regions, for example, is when we introduced DRG payments. And if you're really familiar with the healthcare system already, which you may not be, this is a diagnosis-related group. This is when the government pays in advance for all of the care for, say, a knee replacement, and then because they're paying up front, it incentivizes the doctors and hospitals to be careful about not overspending. And that's what's flattening this growth out. And so if your objective is to understand what we can do about flattening out the expenditure growth, understanding why we have these flat regions is critically important. So I normally would pause for any questions, and I see one just came through in the chat. I'm going to try to see it live. And Emma is kind of just going through this. So let me move to my next figure here. Here, each dot is one of the countries in the OECD, one of the kind of comparison countries to the US. So SWE stands for Sweden, USA, obviously United States of America, POL Poland, all the countries that are kind of comparable to the US along a bunch of dimensions. Along the horizontal is the percent of that country's economy that is spent on healthcare. That's the same graph we were looking at before. And on the vertical is the percent of that country's gross domestic product spent on all other social services, schooling, education, housing, all of the other things the government spends money on, roads, old age homes, etc. And a 45-degree line, that dashed line, is when a country spends the same amount of money on healthcare versus on other social services. And what you see is there's a cloud of all of these comparison countries that spend more on social services and less on healthcare. And then the US is basically the only country below that line, right? So why, right? Why is the US placing comparatively more weight on healthcare spending relative to social services? There's a saying that I really love that says, don't tell me your values, show me your budget and I will tell you your values, right? Our choices, which is spending more on health and less on social services, reflects the values of the society that we have. And I want to show you kind of where these values are playing out in outcomes. So here I have the same countries, but now each of these gray lines that looks like spaghetti in a pot, each of these gray lines is one of those countries on the graph before, and the heavy black line is the United States. And what we're looking at is life expectancy over time. Life expectancy over time. So there's a number of trends here. First, all of these graphs are going up, right? Over time, we're getting better. Why are we living longer? Well, that's precisely what I opened the conversation with. Would you rather be in 1890 or today? We have new medicine, we have new treatment, we have new standards of sanitization, all of these different things that help us live longer. But if you look at these graphs, the United States is kind of in the middle of the pack. So we're not necessarily getting the most bang for the buck. We're spending more comparative to all the other countries, but our outcomes are not. Which leads me to put my managerial cap on, and it should probably have you put your own managerial cap on too and say, why? What might be driving this? So I'm going to introduce kind of one open-ended concept that might help us get to it. And that's the idea of a production function. And I'm going to motivate this production function with an example of the diner where I go to eat breakfast a couple mornings a week. So this is George and Maria at the diner in Waltham where I work. And George and Maria run a diner, and they take a bunch of inputs, which are eggs and bacon and cheese and their own time, and they put it into this product that they make, and their output is lovely meals and smiles in the morning, right? They take inputs and put out and produce outputs, which I have kind of modeled here in a very, very crude way, right? Firms, companies, healthcare institutions, or non-healthcare institutions take a bunch of inputs, put it into some sort of process that you all know because you're all professionals in the workplace. It's the secret sauce that makes you do what you do, and they produce outputs. Where outputs here might be number of quality lives lived. It might be number of children cured of leukemia. It might be number of knee replacements done. It might be number of sterilized surgical gloves that come off the assembly line. And inputs are all of the human labor and all of the extra capital, all of the physical goods that go into producing these products in a company. So going back to the example of the diner, suppose for a moment that we kept adding more and more cooks into the diner. At first, an extra cook would be really helpful. right? The extra cook would help them. One cook could make pancakes, while another could make omelets, while another could man the cash register. It would be really useful. But if you added an 18th or a 19th or a 20th chef to the diner, they'd just be standing around. There wasn't that much space in the diner. And we capture that with something like a production function, where along the horizontal axis is how much money we're putting in for inputs. Starting in the bottom left at 0, moving right across this figure is more and more money we're putting into our inputs. And up the vertical axis is how much money, how much output we're getting. What's the result of all those inputs we're putting in? Where the inputs are our time and our capital building the healthcare that we want to see. And if you think about this line, this curved bow shape, as a production function, we can think of a man walking up this curve. And as there are more and more inputs, as the man is walking up the curve, the return is getting shallower and shallower. This is the idea that the second cook that they add is really, really productive. But the 20th cook that they add is just standing around, is not so productive. So when we think about a country producing health, or an individual hospital like Beth Israel or Mass General producing outputs, thinking about what the production function of that firm is really important. So I want to ask the question that I started with about 5-10 minutes ago about why the US is in the state of the world that they are. And I'm going to give 2 alternative hypotheses that I'm not going to get to today, and I'm going to kind of tease as something that we work out in the course of the class. Here's hypothesis 1. What I have here on the bottom is basically the input-output graph that I showed before. Input is how much money we're spending. Here's the 18% of GDP. This is how much money across the horizontal. And up on the vertical is output. It's healthcare system performance. And here's the same kind of graph that I showed before. And it very well may be the case that the US is just on a different production function than all the other countries. Norway, New Zealand, Germany, Switzerland, France, Sweden, UK, Australia, they might just be better at producing health than we are. Right? We're on a lower production function. For the same inputs, we get less output, we get less health. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is we're below our production function. We're at point C. We're not as efficient as we could be if we were using the products that we have in different ways. So think about a hospital that isn't employing its doctors and nurses correctly. Instead of the doctors and nurses providing really, really good patient care, they're working in the parking garage checking in people's cars. That's an inefficient use of your inputs and brings us not onto our production possibilities frontier. So why is the US getting the outcomes that we might be getting? These are the kind of questions that we think about in the course. But I'm not only about asking questions of why, I'm also about evaluating possibility and policies that can help us get to a better point. And doing so really, really relies on making hard trade-offs. Trade-offs is the language of economics. And we think about this criteria of efficiency as helping us know how we're doing our trade-off. And one tool I really like is something called the iron triangle. There are 3 goals of healthcare, right? High quality care. High quality healthcare is getting the results that we want. Low cost care and high access care, meaning low barriers to people who want to access this care. Now, it's really, really difficult to get all 3 of these at the same time. You can have a high quality system with a lot of access to everyone, but it's going to be very costly. Or you can have a low cost system with a lot of quality, but it's going to be not accessible to everyone. And so thinking about how to expand this triangle rather than just one of these points alone is the way that I, as an economist, think about the fundamental questions of healthcare. So in the remaining 3 minutes I have, what I want to do is just give you a preview of the arc of the course that I teach, the economics of healthcare management. And I'm just going to read across weeks 1 and 2 as an introduction to healthcare. Then I talk about health insurance, which is a deeply important talk. I spend a couple of weeks on health insurance concepts. Week 5, I talk about how we pay for care. how are doctors and nurses and other clinicians compensated for the work that they do. I talk about the prices that consumers end up paying. I talk about how we coordinate between the large teams in the healthcare space. I look at research in the frontier of economic activity. And then I spend some time on pharma and biotech. And then we end with some really, really innovative student projects in the class. So I always end my classes with a little bit of what's going on the next week to give people a sense of where we're going moving forward. But today, I'm just going to stop and kind of, I know questions aren't the easiest to ask right now, but offer you the opportunity to ask me questions over email that is there, or find me on LinkedIn and send me a message. The idea is that even though I haven't started being your professor yet, in some sense, I am as of today. And so if you have any questions, I'm totally okay with you diving in and reaching out either now or in the next couple days or so. So I hope I could share with you a little bit of my excitement. We have really, really core courses we teach in this program. And my experience with the students who I still keep in touch with many months after they graduate is they like it quite a bit. So thank you.
Ben, thank you so much. It's fascinating as always. We did get one really interesting comment in the Q&A that I threw in the chat for you. I don't know if you were able to see it, about your health expenditure curve versus percentage of GDP. And I didn't know if you wanted to engage
Yeah,
with this idea
Ben,
at
Ben.
all.
Yeah, Ben, no, I totally appreciate this, right? So we had two different graphs. One is a percentage of GDP, where the other is individual expense, right? So the GDP number is fundamentally constrained at the top by 100, right? You can't spend more than 100% of GDP, whereas the per capita expenditure, in some sense, has no bound of growth, which is why that one looks much more exponential. So Ben, I really appreciate that question. If you were not in the webinar setting and you were in the actual kind of the way that I run my class normally, we would dive really deeply into this and kind of unpack it a little bit more. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. And as Ben said, Ben is incredibly connected to the students in his course. We have some partner organizations that we work with in this program. And Ben, I know for some time, was going and having lunch with folks that worked at that partner organization in order to get to know them and spend time with them. And I hope you really see Ben's offer to connect with you as very, very real, because he is very much someone who wants to connect with students. So with
Oh,
that, I want to qualify kind of Ben's class, as I promised, in a little more context about the program and the other courses you might take. And Ben, if you're able to stay with us, you might have some thoughts on some of these courses
sure.
too. So I will ask you to hang out with us. So um, you can see here that within the Healthcare MBA curriculum, we have 3 different types of courses that students participate in: foundational courses, core courses, and healthcare specific electives. Across the entirety of the program, students take between 12 and 15 courses. You may say to me, Emma, how is that not a literal number? The answer is, for when you go ahead and apply, we're going to take a look at your former coursework, whether that's you've done a master's degree or an undergraduate degree, and see if you've already built some of the skills that are covered in our foundational courses. And if the answer is yes, you will be waived out of that coursework. And either the amount of coursework you'll do in this program will go down, or will even, in some cases, replace the coursework in this program with other business related courses to complete your MBA. So at the bottom, you will take 12 courses, and at the top of the range, you will take 15. So foundations are going to teach you the language of business. We see actually in the healthcare MBA, the vast majority of folks do not come with a business background. That is not always true. So many will take all of our foundational courses. Ben's course on the microeconomics of healthcare is one of our foundations courses. Similarly, things like accounting are in our foundations. I will say I've spent a lot of time talking to our students in this program, and they shared with me frankly, some concern about some of the foundational courses or worries of, oh my God, I've never done accounting. Am I going to be able to do this? And to a person that I've spoken to, they have shared that these are their favorite courses of the entire curriculum and that they have been extraordinarily transformational in their day-to-day jobs. So, for example, I spoke to a site manager, an operations manager at a hospital system, and she shared with me that she used to host weekly finance meetings for her sites and, frankly, basically deputize someone else to understand what was going on because she didn't have that background. And now, because she took the business foundations courses, she is empowered to be a much more robust participant in those conversations, and it has made her a better site manager. Our core courses focus on business mastery. These are courses that all students who do an MBA must take. However, in our program, there's all of the courses have healthcare examples and viewpoints infused into them. So courses in this category will be things like leading responsibly, which will integrate cases specific to healthcare or projects specific to healthcare. In the electives bucket, we have 4 electives that were designed in conjunction with a major hospital system that they helped us to understand exactly what their employees needed to be successful in accelerating their careers. And so these are the elective courses that all students in this program take. Courses in this category include things like project management within healthcare or healthcare innovations. So, thinking about how to innovate within the healthcare space. For example, in that course, there was a group of nurses that worked together on a group project to look at nurse burnout and created a nurse burnout support program that they were able to pitch during a pitch competition to their broader hospital network. So, as you can see, these courses are deeply rooted in healthcare. You are given ample opportunity, inclusive of Ben's class, to do projects in each of these spaces and think about how the coursework you are learning applies to your day-to-day context. Something I want to say out loud, and I think this is coming through, but I want to make sure I underline it, is that this fundamentally is an MBA. The concepts you learn can be applied to any industry. So if you are sitting on the line and are saying, Emma, I work in healthcare now, I find it incredibly interesting, but I may want to shift into a different industry in the future, this will still give you the core business concepts you need to be successful in navigating through any industry. However, it is specifically tuned toward the healthcare industry so that should you look to continue your career in that space, you can immediately see the connections between, as Ben was saying, something like a demand curve and healthcare, as opposed to having to make those dot connections yourself. I also want to talk about how you learn. So I just talked about what you will learn. Um, And then I want to talk a little bit about how you learn. Sean, if you have a moment, if you could throw in the chat a link to our curriculum, if folks want to follow along at all with this, it might become a little clearer as I speak. So, in most of the courses, thanks, Sean, or most of the semesters of this program, you are going to take 2 courses at any given time. Often one of those is online in the evening at a specified time. So, like Ben's course, you are on Zoom with a group of people at a specific time, and you are interacting with the cohort of learners that you are going through the program with. Often, the other course you take is taken also online, but on your own time. Us in academia will call that asynchronous, but really what it means is you're going to be given modules to complete that you could do some at lunchtime, some on the weekend, some in the morning, and you are not required to be online at a specific time. Evening courses, you will know ahead of time what evening that is happening on, and the courses range from 2.5 to 3.5 hours, dependent on the course. Associated with each course, you can expect something like 10 to 12 hours of coursework. And so that gives you a sense of kind of how much across each semester you will be investing from a program related perspective on top of any other responsibilities you have. The full program runs just under 3 years. You're going to go for 8 semesters. That is inclusive of summer semesters, which you can see on the curriculum that Sean shared with you. And a reminder, because this is a cohorted program, which is a word I keep using without defining, you will enter with a group of students. You will take all of your coursework with those same students. You will all work together in that kind of specified curriculum that Sean shared with you on the website over the course of those 3 years. And so you will build deep networked connections with them. But there also is an expectation that you will consistently take those 2 courses each semester alongside your cohort. I want to pause here before jumping into the application requirements just to talk a little bit about how people balance this program with their other responsibilities. Frankly, that tends to be the question we get asked most. And the way I'll take on that question is just to tell you a few stories of some of our students who have shared with me how they went about navigating that. So the first story comes from one of our graduates. In the middle of the program, his partner gave birth to their second child. And he managed to navigate that time in his life and completing the program in the 3 years that alongside his cohort. And what he shared with us was, one, it took a real conversation between him and his partner about ways that he could support their growing family, but also give attention to his coursework. And so he shared with us he missed some weekend activities that his family was doing. He had to wake up or go to sleep at different times than he maybe otherwise would. But even in that very extreme example of someone who's navigating a major life change, he was able to be successful in navigating the course and that time. Another story comes from graduation for one of our students. So our program director, Iris, always tells this wonderful story of going up to some children who were there of one of our graduates and saying, "Oh, aren't you so proud of mom for graduating from this program?" And they were like, "Yes, we are so excited. We are so proud of her. And we're super glad she graduated because dad is a terrible cook." And Iris leaned in and wanted to understand more. And certainly, gender norms aside, in that family, the standard order of operations was that mom was more involved in meal times. But during this time of her moving through the program, her partner was able to take on more of those responsibilities. And the children remained nourished, maybe less happily so, but they did, as a partnership or as a family, invest in our students' success. And so that's all to say, it takes a lot of really thoughtful planning, but it is absolutely possible for folks to navigate this program alongside their other responsibilities. Sean, I'm going to pass it to you to just talk a little bit about application requirements.
Yeah, wonderful. I appreciate it. And thank you, Ben, for the great information in your class as well. So my name is Sean Connolly. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Admissions, and I also work specifically with the Healthcare MBA and from the admissions standpoint. And one question that had already come up was about a fee for the application. Do know that the application is free to do. With your application, we do require that you send all transcripts from institutions that you've attended, whether it's master's degree, bachelor's degree, you want to get us all transcripts. With that being said, I do know some students got their degrees from outside of the United States. If that is the case, you do need to provide us with a NACCES approved course by course credit evaluation. So if you did attend a university outside of the United States, that is a requirement for us. With the transcripts, we do require a resume as up to date as possible, please. We do also require a letter of recommendation. There is going to be a prompted essay on the application as well. And then this actually goes to another question that was asked, was about the GRE and GMAT. As you'll see on here, that it is optional. It is not a requirement for the application, but it is something that you can do and provide for us if you so choose to do the exam. So while it's still optional, do know that it is something that we will accept if you choose to do the exam. And then some important upcoming dates, just know that our final application deadline is August 1st of 2025. We are releasing decisions within 2 weeks after completed application. Now, I do want to be clear, that's not you submitting the application. It's when we get your full documents, everything is in. Once we receive everything, then it's 2 weeks from that date to get a decision. And then classes will begin in September of 2025. It's going to be here, snap of the fingers. We're already going to be in September. In the admissions office, I do love to connect with you and have conversations with you, learn about what your plans are, make sure that this program is for you. Emma, I know, does the same as well. I know some of you have either talked to one or both of us. So you see our emails at the bottom. Please feel free to connect with us to have a conversation about your application, about your situation. We are happy to walk you through this process to make sure that you are have all the answers that you need to make sure that this is the right fit for you. So email me, email Emma, and we can set up a time to chat outside of today.
Awesome. Well, with that, I want to give folks time to put some questions in the chat. And I know we've been answering many of them as we've gone along. Ben, I'd love to ask you a question while we're seeing if anyone else has questions on the line, which is, tell us a little bit about how you've noticed students interacting with each other in your class. Have you seen any interesting connections formed across roles, even in your classroom?
Yeah, I mean, some of my favorite conversations have been between one of the students who worked at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center downtown Boston, who was responsible for buying all of the large capital machines like MRI machines and CT scanners, with one of the emergency room doctors. And these individuals had never met at that point, up to that point in the system, but all of their work had a ton to do with each other. And I think that one of the really unique aspects about this class is that my students enter the program not really understanding why across these large octopus tentacle healthcare systems people are doing what they're doing, and leaving feeling more connected and able to solve problems with people across the healthcare system in ways that they didn't know how to solve problems with before. And immediately their boss or their boss's boss starts to notice that. And I mean, the purpose of this program is not for you to get a promotion. The purpose is to grow and expand the thinking that you're doing in your own mind and enjoy the educational process. But along the way, you develop skills that allow you to solve problems in the workplace that you otherwise would not have been able to do. And I actually weave that into my very teaching in terms of the assignments that I have are, give me a real world problem and let's figure out a solution based on the ideas in my class. So certainly I think the conversations and, I'm always surprised that when I let my students choose groups for projects, I don't assign them. And my first thought was, oh, it's going to be the same type of people with one kind of job like to work in the same type of groups of people. Every time, like always, groups are extremely diverse across role, across educational background, professional credential. And here it's like the whole is more than the sum of their parts. If you're a baseball team, you don't want a team of all pitchers. You want a pitcher and a left fielder and a shortstop. You want a diversity of skills. And I think that's the same in the classrooms that we have. As far as I can tell, Emma, there are very, very few, if not any other programs like this in the United States. This is a incredibly unique healthcare focused full MBA program. And we are part of something that is just incredibly cool and also will be the kind of thing that makes people stand out.
Yeah, and Ben, not to betray your trust in any way, but something Ben has shared with me is he actually chose to come to Bentley because, in part, because of this program and being able to teach in this program, and that's clear to me when you talk about the experiences you've had in this program.
It's a major draw. One of the best parts of working in this program is teaching in this curriculum. Yeah.
That's awesome. Sean, I'm thinking a little bit about some of the questions we tend to get from students that are considering applying to the program. I know a lot of folks do ask about the cost of the program. And so I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of insight into how folks can learn more about, for every student in our programs, kind of cost to them for the program.
Well, I mean, right off the bat, I would say set up a time to talk with me first and foremost, because everybody's application is different. There's no set, there's no set guideline in terms of how that will work. So my first thought is get in touch with me. We can have a conversation. We can talk about your application, talk about your background, and go into that. I will say that, one of the things you talked about is the waivers. I mean, that will lower the cost a little bit because you're not taking a certain amount of courses. I know, I believe it was Ben on the line here is asked about like taking less courses. You start off at 15, it goes down to 12 depending on how many you're able to waive. So if you did take these classes, and there are guidelines to those waivers, one thing that I do like to make sure of is that it is something that you took within the last 5 years, give or take. I mean, I've had applicants who, 2005, and I'm like, it's a little past the date in terms of what we would say, but there is opportunity to save money there. But I will say the cost per course right now is at $6,095. You take that and you multiply that by 15. So the max cost for this program is just under $92,000. What the scholarship or what the discount would be for you is dependent on certain factors. So that is something I would say, get in contact with me and we can talk about it.
That sounds great. Well, looking at our time, I want to give folks time to transition to their 1 o'clock commitments, or for those that are on the line that are not on the East Coast, whatever commitments you have coming up. So I want to start by saying, Ben, thank you so much for joining us and giving us insight into your class, as well as the experience that your students have. Your enthusiasm is always so strongly felt when you're discussing this type of content, and I hope others on the line were able to truly feel all of that. The other thing I will say is I cannot underline enough and say to you enough, get in touch with me and Sean if you're on the line and you have any curiosities about the program. We just want to get to know you. We want to understand your goals and really support you in consideration of this program. We would be thrilled to support you through the process. So thank you all so much. We expect to see you in our inboxes and hope we will. And from there, hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.